Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Terry Rich. I'm a birder and ornithologist here in Boise, Idaho. And I've been giving monthly bird talks up at the Foothills Learning Center on the first Wednesday of each month. But, you know, we're all staying indoors and staying away from each other. I hope you are anyway. I sure am these days. And so we're going to put this presentation that normally would be shown on April 1st on the web, and who knows when you might see it, but it'll be there for your convenience for watching. I've been birding and interested in birds since I was in junior high, and I spent my whole career actually in birds and bird conservation. So this is a lot of fun for me to continue to explore new technology and try to share with you the things that I enjoy about birds and birding. All right, today's talk is on spring birding in Hull's Gulch. Hull's Gulch is, for locals know this, but if you're not local, it is the gulch on the side of Boise that has been preserved, and that's where the Foothills Learning Center is, and they do a lot of nature programming for all ages. And that's where I give my talk at least once a month. So this is a virtual Foothills Learning Center Day. The presentation I want to give today and also in May and June, and whether we'll be together by then or not, I don't know. It's not looking too good. We'll put those up on the web as well. So I want to talk about bird identification, and you can see the various steps here. First off, you can always prepare yourself for where you're going birding, especially if you're in an area that you're not familiar with. And it may be Boise if you're just starting, or Southwest Idaho. But anytime I go to a new region, or especially a new country, I get the local field guide or the best field guide available and just start flipping through the pages, looking at the bird pictures, and especially looking at birds that are kind of similar to each other, and say, okay, now if I see one of these, how am I going to tell it from its near relative? Is it a mark on the head or the face or whatever? We're going to talk a little bit about finding birds, detecting birds. What I call seeing them. That is, you can have a bird, but you need to sort of see them to know what to look for, and what we typically call field marks, characteristic colors or marks that will give you a good idea of what it is. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on bird song, and I'll explain why that is here in a second. It's always helpful to notice what a bird is doing, what its behavior is. You're not going to have a nuthatch swimming in a pond. You're not going to have a mallard climbing a tree trunk. So those clues on behavior can be important. Certainly other behaviors, and especially being able to describe to someone else where the bird is that you're looking at and you're puzzling over. Very often the very best tool you have is another birder standing next to you, but you need to be able to tell them where that bird is, and we'll have a little fun with that in a minute. And finally, what I call Gestalt, the birding term is jizz. It's silhouettes, shapes and proportions, things that are sort of hard to explain exactly, but as you bird more and more, I think really expert birders spend more and more, they do a lot more identification by the overall impression of the size and shape of the bird. So today I want to spend a little time on tools, field guides, web, and the ever-increasing arsenal of apps we can carry on our phone with us while we're out in the woods, far away from other people. Talk about basic techniques for identification, and then, like I said, spend quite a bit of time on bird song. And we'll play a bunch of songs and kind of talk about, you know, what we're listening to. So once again, studying the field guide for the area you're going to go to is really always useful. It's something you can do at your convenience anywhere, you know, in your house. When you have a few minutes, pick up the guide and flip through it, look at the plates. Superb website that I'll look at in a little bit of detail is all about birds. That's where you can go and put in some bird you're curious about, and then see what similar species might be. You can use checklists, which are typically created for a lot of different areas. Like if you go to a national park or a refuge, there'll be a checklist, and that gives you a much more reduced list of species for you to think about. Always be aware what habitat you're in. You know, some things just are never going to be found in the woods. Some things are never going to be found on a pond. So thinking about what the habitat is will help you as well. practice. There's nothing like, as within, like playing a guitar or skiing or anything else. The more you do it, the better you'll get. Go out with people who know birds. That's a fast way to really pick up a lot of good tips and cues. What do people use to tell this from that? Another rewarding experience, or can be rewarding, is to when you're by yourself birding, and you locate a bird and you can't identify it, stick with it, follow it, keep listening, keep looking, and it may take you a while, especially if it's flying away from you through the sagebrush, but you stick with it for a little while and see if you can't figure it out. Those birds often stick in the brain, then you remember that experience, and it's like, oh yeah, that was that chipping sparrow, I know that guy. Learn common species so that you realize when something unusual is around, and that's something you can do anytime you're out in the yard, or even, you know, riding your bike, running, whatever you do. Be listening all the time to the birds, and then you'll get used to house finches and every sound they make. And when you hear something a little different, then you may go, wait, that's not what I usually hear, and grab your bins and go find it. My favorite field guide is the National Geographic guide. It's in its, I think, 7th edition. Yep, 7th edition. But that's got a lot of species. And if you're just getting started, you maybe want a smaller list of birds to think about and study. In the Boise area, we're fortunate to have this field guide with just the 99 most common species. And it's a lot easier to sort of deal with the reduced number. And plus the guide itself is quite small, fits right in your pocket. I mentioned all about birds. This is a fantastic tool at Cornell. It just keeps getting better. The example I picked is, hey, I think I saw a house wren. So you can see house wren there. What All About Birds does is immediately show you some other species that are maybe similar to a house wren. And you could say, yeah, no, that for sure was a house wren, or wait, it had an eye line, maybe it was a Bewick's wren, or whatever. And if those pictures don't meet your needs, at the very bottom you can check and see more birds. So it's a really good place to go and compare different species that are similar. Also another fabulous app from Cornell that's on my phone and should be on your phone. It's free. This is a way of working through what a bird might be right while you're looking at it in the field. I think I've got the various steps. When you start it, the first thing it's going to ask you, there's 5 questions. It's going to say, where did you see the bird? And you can just click on the current location because your phone knows where you are, like it or not. And when did you see the bird? And it's probably going to assume right now. Then it asks you what size. So you got all the way from like a goldfinch to a goose. And just 2 more questions. What were the main colors, up to 3? And what was the bird doing? And you've got a few choices there. When you enter all those in and click next, it'll give you some options. And I didn't do one here, but it'll give you a picture of a bird and say, is this your bird? And if it's not, you can scroll down and give you some other options. And you can go down until you find your bird. And if you don't find it, Merlin wants to know that too, because they improve the app continually as they get feedback from users. Another app I keep on my phone is the Audubon Bird Guide. It's basically an entire field guide sitting on your phone. So you can plunk in any bird you like, at least I think this is North America, and it'll bring up a picture, it'll have a song, it'll have some descriptions about it. So just fabulous, fabulous apps you can carry in your pocket now. So a few sort of basic techniques for identification. I think birders get very good at detecting motion, and people, as you can see by this diagram, we tend to be very, very forward focused, very narrowly focused ahead of us. But the more you bird, the more you start seeing motion way out on the edge of your vision. You start noticing things flying over your head that are at the very top of your peripheral vision. And you just start picking up things, and it might be a leaf or a squirrel or a piece of blowing paper, whatever. The thing is, detect the motion and then figure out what it is. Listen. I think we can do the same thing as we listen. You get, so you listen more and more completely. You sort of increase your peripheral listening as well. And any little sound, squeak, peep, it might end up being a dog or a kid or a squeaky bicycle wheel or something. But again, you want to detect it, then figure out what it is. And we want to detect anything out there that's moving or making a sound. Also, you really don't want to get in a hurry with birding. I find that people who are just starting sometimes think it's a hike, or worse yet, a run of some kind. You don't have to go anywhere. Let the birds dictate your pace. If you just stepped outside your house and they're bird singing, you don't need to go somewhere else. Start with those birds. One of the things that has become popular, especially maybe with some of us who are a little bit older, is called the big sit, or just sitting. Pull up a chair. I do this camping all the time. Pull up my chair, get my binoculars, get a cup of coffee, and just sit in your chair and wait for the birds to come to you, and they will. A lot of things will come by. So you don't have to go somewhere. The parts of the bird, don't expect everybody to memorize all this stuff real fast, but you want to start to learn some of the names for the parts of the bird, so you can tell your friend, hey, it had a crown, it had an orange crown, it had a white crown, it had a little crest, it had an eye ring or not, it had wing bars. The rump was this color or that color. So you want to get a little bit familiar with the parts of the bird, and then it'll just make it quicker for other people to help you, and for you to be looking at the critical parts of the species when you go to the field guide. I mentioned Gestalt. This is something that you will learn over time. It's much like you can tell probably your mom and dad and your kids and your best friends in a second by the way they stand, by the way they walk, just by their overall shape. You know right away who they are. You don't need to see, their skin tone or their hair color, eyes, or anything else. You just know. So you can get there with birds as well. Roger Torrey Peterson and his seminal field guides from I think 1950 or even earlier, put this right in the front of his field guide, or these silhouettes. So he was, of course, all over Gestalt, looking at the length of the tail, the bulk of the bird, the length of the bill, the relative length of the bill, how is it perched, what kind of shape does it have, all that sort of thing. That comes with time. So as I mentioned, one of your best sources of identification help is that person birding right next to you. And it's absolutely hilarious and very predictable that when people start birding and they see something and somebody says, where is it? I'm not kidding. They will say, it's right there. I have an old friend who still says that. It makes me crazy. It's right there. That's not an answer. I have no idea what right there means. In that tree often doesn't help unless there's only one tree in the landscape. This is a good one. See that branch, those branches that form a Y? The entire forest is full of branches that form Ys. They're everywhere. And a very good friend of mine tends to see patterns, and I'm not kidding. See that bark pattern that looks like the Mona Lisa? No, nobody sees that pattern but you. And yet he gets these very elaborate ideas of what he's seeing in the rock face. It works for him. You can't communicate that, believe me. The kind of clues I like to use first are, is it above, below, or at eye level? That really helps people, where are you looking? You're looking up in the sky? Is it on the ground? Where is it? Is it really close? Is it far away? Anything like that to get people in the ballpark. If it's on the ground or in a trunk on a bush. And if for flying birds, is it flying left to right or right to left? Is it above my eye view or below my eye view? If you get those two bits of information, you can just about get them on the bird, bang, like that. It's always nice if you can find something that everybody on the planet can see, like a red barn. See the red barn? It's just to the right of the red barn. Okay, everybody knows what you're talking about. And then we'll use, I'll show you an example of using the clock, which is very helpful for birds in the sky and out on the ocean. And I would say, don't think too much about it, because the more you futz with trying to describe it, the more the bird is likely to move off. So take a couple shots and try to get people to help you before it leaves. So here's the simplest one, where you say, see where the branches form a Y, or see that tree, or right there, or in the leaves. None of that is going to get you to the bird. But this scene has fabulous clues. See the biggest tree on the left, where the sun is illuminating pretty much the entire trunk? Okay, that leaves out all the other trees. Start at the bottom of the trunk, follow it up until you see a big branch going out to the right. Follow the branch out to the right until you see the bird. So if you get your binoculars on that and trace it up and go out, you're probably going to get most people on it right away. So that's kind of an easy one. Like I said, anytime you've got structures in the environment, that helps. See that shed? Go to the left side and go straight up until you run into the bird. Bang. Not so bad. Okay, flying birds, using the clock. You also do this out on the ocean, looking at albatrosses where you've got to use the clock. So in this case, see that palm tree? Probably can see the palm tree. Put a clock on it, draw a line. It's at 1:30 from the palm tree. And if the people trace that line out, they'll probably go right across the bird. So clock directions are really good when you're on a boat or even in a car. You know, straight ahead is 12 o'clock and so on. The clock is laying flat in that case, not upright like this. Okay, so bird songs. I rely almost, well, not exclusively, probably 70 or 80% on bird songs. Now, we could start talking about this bird right here and start talking about the little checks and the tail feather and the white eye line and the shape of the beak and where the white is and where the brown is. But the really cool thing about birds, and like very few other animals do this, is they say who they are every time they open their mouth. Now, we have to learn the language, but they say it over and over and over again. So, you know, why dig through a bunch of plates and look through a bunch of brown and white birds when if you know the song, you don't even have to see this bird and you know what it is. That's why I think song is so cool, and it's really fun. In the old days, and I'm going to go to what the latest technology is, or the latest classifications are here in a second. In the old days, we described songs using terms such as whistles and buzzes, trills, whether a song is simple or complicated, whether it's quite melodic or maybe kind of noisy. Is it fast? Is it slow? Are the notes repeated? Does it go up or down the scale? Those are all useful ways to describe bird songs still, and I find myself doing that a lot. I'll probably do it in a few minutes, despite my trying to go with the newer labels. And by the newer labels, I mean the stuff that Nathan Peplow has done with his earbirding and his Peterson Field Guide to Bird Sounds. This happens to be Eastern North America, but he's also done Western North America. So Nathan basically revolutionized the terminology in bird songs. And he described 7 basic tonal qualities, and we'll listen to those now, assuming this all works fine. So a whistled song. So whistled, really clean phrases that are not buzzy. Buzzy is a thing, buzzy and burry, and we'll listen to that in a minute. So whistled songs, and that was an American robin. Hooting, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. And of course, mostly owls hoot, but not all owls hoot. But that's another story. Clicking should be fairly obvious. Some rails, I think this is a yellow rail. Sounds like you taking 2 pebbles and tapping them together. Not a lot of birds are doing that. That's kind of a specialty. Buzzy, this is an important quality. This is a yellow-throated vireo, but listen to the burry, I think is the best term. The real burry, it's not whistled. It's got a real burry quality of that little buzz going on there. So that's a good thing to listen for. Nasal, and this is, again, a sound that not too many species make. We're very familiar with our red-breasted nuthatches around here, and maybe white-breasted from time to time. Noisy. There's a yellow-headed blackbird. The sound is not a whistle. It's not a buzz. It can be described as noisy. And then this last one is a tropical bird. Is a great example of polyphonic. sounds like maybe 2 or 3 birds singing at the same time. This is a monotone or a pendulum. Bobolinks are polyphonic and a few other species. We find that a lot of our songs are basically either whistled or burry or some combination. This is really helpful. I'm really glad Nathan did this. So he categorizes then 4 patterns. And I love this, the y-axis here, because we can all judge this, I think. Are the notes slow enough to count? Or are they too fast to count? So that puts them into 2 groups. And then the other axis, are the notes, each note unique, or are the notes repeated? So here's what he calls a phrase. The notes are slow enough to count, and each one's a little different. Whoops. Sorry, got mouse control issues. Here we go. Again, there's an American robin. Just even 1, 2, 3. You can definitely count those. They're all a little different. So here, the notes are slow enough to count, but each note is basically the same as the one before it. Almost too fast to count. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's the rock wren. Very classic. It switches from note to note, but it repeats them in a series, is Nathan's description of that sound. Notes too fast to count, and each one's different. A lot of birds are in this ballpark. So I believe that's a house finch, might be a Cassin's finch, but just a little bit too fast to count and kind of going all over the place. And then finally a trill, similar to a series, but the notes are too fast to count. You might be able to count that. I don't think that can. That's a chickadee sparrow. 5 basic pitch patterns: a monotone, up slur, down slur, up and down, and then down and up. I find the last 2 not all that commonly used, but certainly whether it's rising or falling or staying on the same pitch through the song, that's a really good clue. It'll help you figure it out and help your friends figure it out. Just for fun, here's the avian family tree that shows you which birds learn songs. Now, the birds that learn songs can end up with quite complicated songs because they're learning, you get a goldfinch or a starling, they're learning not only from their parents, they're learning from other birds. They learn from mechanical sounds. They might do any sort of a sound, but those learners are really relatively few in the bird world. And you can see they're hummingbirds, parrots, and songbirds. Now, songbirds is a very big group. You know, that's where a lot of our birds are. But you can see all these other groups, swifts and nightjars and plovers and owls, trogons, kingfishers, they're born with a song and that's what they sing. They don't learn anything. And those songs tend to be simpler, a little more raucous. A lot of times we'll listen to several of those, but they're not going to learn anything and they're not going to really throw you too many monkey wrenches. It's the song learners that can mix it up and give you a bit of a fit sometimes. So we're going to go through some birds, listen to some songs, and I just want to explain how I'm going to do this. So everyone, I'm going to kind of run this in quiz, what I call quiz mode. That is, I'll show you the picture, but I'm not going to give you the name right away, and that gives you a second or two, actually several seconds, to see if you can figure out what it is, you remember what it is. I'll play the vocalization, and then I'll give you the name. So it'll give you a little bit of a chance to practice if you're just kind of getting started on some of these birds. And always the goal in this sort of thing isn't, I don't expect anybody to remember all this stuff, especially if you're new at it. It's just to kind of get an idea, what are we listening for? What's the variation out there? And you know, what are we listening for as much as anything? And I also want to give credit to Zeno Canto. It's a fabulous database of bird songs on the web. And you can go there and search for any bird in the world. And for a lot of species, there are maybe hundreds of recordings. So you can get a sense for the tremendous variation that is present in a lot of species. All right, let's see how this goes. So here is one of my favorite birds. They do a lot of variety, and probably can even be, I think, taught to talk. Lost my cursor, sorry, there it is. So that's the most common thing you hear from a black-billed magpie. And that song carries quite a long ways, or song, not really a song, calls. You can hear that a long way off and you know you got a black-billed magpie, sorry. Same for this guy, talk about a song or a call that carries. Described as Chicago. And starlings love this as well. So if you think you've got a California quail where there's no quail habitat, it's probably a starling. They love to do that. These guys are probably one of the favorite sound files to be played in movies of various sorts, even where these birds don't occur, and at times of the day when they don't occur. They love that descending call. And of course, that's a red-tailed hawk. Another hawk we have in the valley, they're quite adaptable to humans. They're out, mainly out in the farmland more than in town, but there's some in town. So pretty similar to a red-tailed, but it often doesn't have that really harsh descent. Swainson's hawk. And they winter in Argentina, so I haven't seen one yet. They won't be here for a little while. Got a long way to fly to get back up to the Boise area. Had 7 of these outside my window just now before we started taping this today. That's the first from our yard to have 7. These guys, there's no sound file because as far as we know, they don't make any sound. Young birds in the nest do some sorts of hissing and squawking and probably some begging sounds of some sort. But as far as we know, adult turkey vultures are silent, which is pretty interesting. They can smell a dead skunk from 50 miles away, but they cannot make a peep, apparently. So that's pretty interesting. The only reason I'm going to play, I don't suspect you're too puzzled by this bird. Going on my yard right now, a young bird that's driving me nuts, caws about every 3 seconds all day long. But the only reason is because this bird is also around much less commonly, and you might overlook it if you're not kind of thinking about it. And of course, if this bird calls, there's no mistaking because they don't sound anything like a crow. That's a common raven, and sometimes you can hear that call a long way off, or even when they're quite high passing over where you might be, you'll hear that very uncrow-like squawk, I guess, and look around and there's a raven somewhere. Another bird that most people are familiar with, and another bird that starlings absolutely love, killdeer. They seem to be permanently annoyed at everybody. They're just always indignant about you being around because they probably are thinking about nesting and you're bothering them. Another bird that it's surprising how far these guys get from the river from time to time, and you can sometimes hear them quite high in the air because of their very distinctive, innate, unlearned So of course that's a belted kingfisher. We call that a rattle. And every belted kingfisher I've ever heard sounds almost exactly the same. Again, unlearned innate call, and distinctive from the other birds around here for sure. These guys have 2 calls that you hear quite often, although at different times of year they vary. So this one, they'll do that all year round. Descending, piercing, carries a long, long way. Pay no attention to where they're in that time. And then the call that they start doing as spring rolls around. And they typically don't do that after breeding season, or fall and winter. You just hear the piercing call, not the longer. Also very loud, very distinctive, and you can hear it, yeah, maybe for a mile. Northern flicker. Ours is the red-shafted variety. There used to be two species, yellow-shafted in the east, red-shafted in the west. And obviously, as you can see on these birds, most of ours are red. Once in a while, you get a yellow one. Another woodpecker, most like the flicker, most of the year it gives us a little peep, peep, peep call, but during breeding season, it'll start to make pennies. So that descending, repeated note, that's what you start hearing more during breeding season. And the little peep, 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 you just get that during the winter and fall. County woodpecker. Male has a little red on his head, the female doesn't. Another bird that sounds something like the kingfisher, I suppose, is a loud, repeated sort of a racket that carries a long way. And again, like these other birds that don't learn their songs, the American Kestrel sounds pretty much the same anywhere I've heard it. This bird is the smallest falcon in North America, a superb bird, and we've got him resident at Gulch, so I think we see him literally every time we go up there any time of the year. I should say that starlings also love to mimic kestrels, and lesser goldfinches for some reason love this call. I've been hearing it a lot from the lesser goldfinches in my neighborhood. It's apparently easy to imitate. This bird is sort of the icon for the Foothills Learning Center, since there's a pair that nests by the front door year after year. Unlearned song, very simple. And of course, this is Say's Phoebe. So once again, every Say's Phoebe I've ever heard sounds just like that. And you can hear one note, and you've probably got a Say's Phoebe, unless you've got a lesser goldfinch doing a Say's Phoebe, which I've also heard just in the last week or so. Okay. Another one of the flycatchers that's rather late. The Say's Phoebes are already here, but this guy comes up quite a bit later. Another flycatcher, innate song. And like the kilder, they seem like they're sort of always permanently agitated about something. This sound file will go on like that for about 5 minutes, so I'm going to turn him off. Very twittery, very sort of loud and explosive, and they go all day like that. Western kingbird. We've got two doves in the area. Well, I just told you what that was. You probably knew anyway. Morning dove, and I think it's well named. You can hear the mournful sound of that call, and it's good to compare it to this bird, which has two different calls. I think this is this first one is the sort of typical dove type sound, but you hear with this guy a little bit of rhythm there. The other sound that this bird makes is quite undove-like. Very odd call for a dove. There are a lot of doves in the world. I've seen quite a few different species. I've never heard that kind of sound before from this Eurasian collared dove. So again, even at a distance, you can tell the doves apart by the rhythmic nature of the collared dove's song and the slower, less rhythmic of the morning. These birds are probably pretty well known. One of the calls that you'll hear, again, a lot outside the breeding season, carries a long way and is pretty distinctive. That's that descending, piercing call right there. And then the very familiar breeding season song of the red-winged blackbird. And while we're around, I would just point out that a lot of people, when they first get started, they don't realize that the female redwing looks like that bird, that brown bird with the streaks. It looks like a giant sparrow, but it's quite a bit bigger than the sparrows. It's got a very sharp beak. If you look at that, very unlike the sparrows. And there's some other field marks, but it can kind of sneak up on you if you're not thinking about other streaky brown birds that are not sparrows. Here's one. One of the skulkier birds around here. Spotted towhee. The song of the eastern birds is described as drink your tea, and this guy's actually doing drink your tea. He's not going to. So a long trill, usually just by itself, and sometimes it has the drink your part, but often you just hear tea, tea. Beautiful bird, very skulky, and a lot of times you can hear this trill coming out of some dense bitterbrush or sagebrush or down by the river, and you won't necessarily see the bird. You might have to look around a bit to get him. He kind of likes to hide. So here's the #1 feeder bird in Idaho, year after year after year after year, for people who have seen my talk on that. And just in the last couple of weeks, they've started doing their trill. There's a good trill. It's probably a little bit too fast to count. Pretty much on the same pitch. But you'll hear them doing that all over the valley now. Whereas during the winter, most of the time while they're on their feeders, they're not making that trill sound. Dark-eyed junco. Well, I already played the American robin a couple times because it's such a great example of a whistled song where the notes are different and slow enough to count. Even though they wake me up at 4:30 in the morning, it's such a nice song, I'm not complaining. A bird that's very similar to the American robin, and which some of you may have picked up in the background of one of the earlier birds, just a couple birds back. And when we go a little deeper into song in May and June, we'll look much more closely at how similar the black-headed grosbeak and the American robin are. They've got whistled songs, they've got phrases that are slow enough to count, and we can talk about the slight quality differences. The black-headed grosbeak goes a little bit faster. The notes are what I call sweeter, and I don't know how you describe that, but it's maybe a little more pure. The notes are a little more pure, a little quicker, often a little bit higher than a robin. But sometimes these are two birds that learn their songs, and they can overlap in their qualities. And sometimes it's hard to tell what you're listening to when you actually have to look at the bird. Here's our one good example of a nasal bird. We already heard it earlier in the example. Redbreasted Nuthatch. They are really cranking up their singing right now in my neighborhood. This winter I haven't had too many. Now I'm hearing probably 5, 8, 9 on my 3-mile walk every day. So they're really getting vocal. One of the few nasal calls we've got in this part of the world. The Well, let's play this first before we talk about it. So this is the most common warbler in this part of the world. It's actually very widespread. It's one of the most common birds in North America. And this is another song that a lot of warblers do. See if you can hear two parts. Not that. Of course, then I get to the end of the file. Let me play it again. So there's two parts. In the second part, changes pitch a little bit from the first part. So you've got a few notes that kind of on the same pitch, and then it shifts the frequency a little bit. Kind of a two-part song. A lot of warblers have two-part songs like that, and they can sound quite similar to each other. If we were in the East, we'd want to get very good at these because we have a lot of species. We don't have so many out here, and our warblers are pretty easy to tell apart by song. Male on the left, female on the right. One of our most common resident birds. So that's a pretty complex song, but it's interesting with song sparrows. They almost always start out with 2 to 5 notes on the same frequency. And then do it 1, 2, 3, and then some complex notes. They almost always give themselves away with those opening notes being at the same frequency before they go into the complex stuff. So that's very typical song sparrow. Also typically found in the brush, by water, along the Boise River, and anywhere up through the foothills where we've got the grass covering some water. Give it away again. So the house finch is the most common bird in every month of the year in Ada County. I mentioned that juncos, dark-eyed juncos are the most common feeder bird year after year. They're always number 1 in Idaho. House finches are usually number 2 or number 3, but they're also here all summer long. Juncos are going up in the mountains. The house finches are here all year round. So in any given month, this is going to be the most common bird reported. Now there's a very similar species called Gasson's finch. They nest up a little higher, like up around Silver City or you go up to Bogus. But I've never heard a Gasson's finch give that last bit. Listen to the very end of the song. You'll hear this rising breeze. Seems like house finches do this most of the time. Breeze at the very end. And I haven't heard Gasson's finch do that. They look a little different too, but if you're listening to the songs, especially if you're getting up in the mountains a little bit, they will overlap in elevation. So you want to listen for that clue, and then of course it always helps to get a look when you have birds that are so similar to each other. So, sort of like the song sparrow, the second half of the song of this species, white-crowned sparrow, has some kind of tricky, complex notes. It's pretty hard to describe, but they almost always start out with this long note. Listen to the first note. Almost like a thrush on one pitch, and then some jumbly stuff. As soon as you hear that opening note, in most cases, you're going to know what you've got. One of the favorite birds of everybody. It's on more pillowcases and calendars and license plates, I think, than anything. Oops, Blackcapped Chickadee. Excuse me. So that's the call, the chickadee call. That's where they get their name, and they do that year round. What you start hearing pretty much as soon as days get longer, you might even hear it right around Christmas time, is their so-called May Day song. Little 2-note, second note lower than the first. You can hear 2 different ones there. You call that May Day or springtime. The mountain chickadees do, they have a similar kind of a call, but it's actually often 3 parts. And I just learned that the chestnut-backed chickadee of the Pacific Coast does not have this call. I did not know that till recently. These guys are just starting to sing. It's the most volume from the smallest bird I can think of. And you'll never see that bird on the right unless you're at a nest. They just don't show their ruby crown very much. Tiny, tiny bird, but man, do they punch out a song. And that up and down at the end is very distinctive. So again, now on this bird, I would say that last part is what's distinctive. Forget the first notes. You don't need to worry about that. But when you hear that loud up and down, that's the key for this guy. And since he's so small and very, very active, sometimes you have to do a little work to find him. Good luck getting a picture of that guy. So these guys are quite common in Hull's Gulch, not here yet. And this is definitely too fast to count. I think you'll agree with me. So a series of very, very rapid trills. Quite distinctive, house wren. Another bird that punches out a lot of song, but tends to be kind of skulky. So they're maybe down in the shrubs or hiding near the ground, and you might hear a lot of singing before you actually see the bird. It's good to get them at the beginning of their nesting season, because then they tend to perch out a little bit more out on the top of a branch or on a stump, and they're really singing their hearts out because they're trying, you know, of course, to attract a mate, like all of these males are. I mean, that's why they're singing. A few more birds. This is one of my favorite birds on the entire planet. They've got a variety of squeaks, whistles, hoots, squawks, chatters. That chatter is a lot like a Baltimore or a Bullock's oriole. And they will just sing all day long, especially early in the year. It's another bird that can be quite skulky once it starts nesting, it's kind of hiding out. This picture right here was taken in Hull's Gulch. The bird just way out on the opening, sometimes sitting on the wires, just singing its brains out. Great, great bird to listen to, a lot of fun. Usually has me smiling before he's finished. Another one of our warblers that it can be quite hard to see. They're marsh birds, and they're small, kind of cattail birds. But this song is unmistakable, I would say. Sort of like the end of the Kinglet song, up and down, up and down, up and down. But the whole song's that way. So you hear that up and down coming from the cattails. You've got a common yellow throat. If you can get past all the blackbirds in the background, messing up the soundscape and a song trail. Another bird that has a couple of different songs that you're apt to hear. The one song more. Come on. So like the goldfinches, a lot of just chittery, chattery, deep notes, kind of hard to describe. Okay, you'll go on doing that forever. You get a flock of them, it's a real Twitter fest in the old sense of the word Twitter. But this song is much more distinctive. Whoops. Very strongly ascending buzz. There. Up the scale. I haven't heard anything else that does that. So you hear a bunch of little twittery birds in the treetop. It could be American goldfinches, lesser goldfinches, or systems. But as soon as you hear that, you know you got at least one system. Speaking of goldfinches. So these songs are getting harder to describe. They're rapid, twittering and peeping notes. They go very fast. The goldfinches are also mimics. I think they've been, both Lester and American have been defined of having 100 or more other species they mimic. I definitely hear these guys doing Kestrel for some reason, as well as lesser goldfinches. So anytime you got the twittery, peepy flock of little birds, you got 3 possible species. And here's the third one, lesser goldfinch. But this descending note they've got is distinctive. That. Never mind the rest of their chittering and tweeting and differing like the American goldfinch and the pine siskin. But the lesser goldfinch has this very mournful descending note, and they do it a lot. So you can, that's what you want to listen for lesser goldfinch. I think this might be my last bird, one of my very favorites. Probably everybody knows it. And that single note, that descending note, that was the meadowlark. I think we have lark buntings in the background. This must be from the eastern part of the Rocky Mountains. And then that last bit was the flight song. We'll play this again. You can hear the regular song, the descending pure, and then a flight song, which is a rapid series of notes. They only seem to make when they're flying from one perch to another. I tell you, hitting this sound button is a real dexterity game for me. Okay, typical song. There, that pew. That's very common. They do that a lot. And then the last bit will be the flight song. Okay, one more pure. Here he goes. That's flying. He's flying when he does that. So if you watch the mountain sagebrush, you'll see that. You'll hear those 3 different songs that they do. It'll be, you can tell immediately when they start flying because they switch. So just a couple more points I wanted to make today. If you didn't see it, I've been writing a column for the Idaho Press, and they asked me to do a piece on birding, the perfect social distancing activity. That's online somewhere, or if you can't find it there, send me an email or send me a text. But I'm serious about it. You know, it's a great thing that we can do besides sitting in the house and going nuts with our spouses and kids, should they be around. You know, you can get out there by yourself, be perfectly healthy about it. It's good for the soul for sure, and it's probably good for your physical body to go birding. So thanks very much for joining me and joining Tom behind the scenes today. This is fun, and like I said, if we can't get together for a few months, we might be putting together a few more of these talks. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions or comments or feedback, there's my email there. I know it's kind of a long one. I'm also on Facebook, Terry Rich. You can find me there, and drop me a note or just say hi. Thanks.